to say that my heart is here with you all, but I also want to give a moment of silence for my Muslim brothers and sisters in New Zealand who were shot. So I just want to give a moment of silence for their families. Thank you. An open letter to the people in power in this country. On July 18th, a politician called a girl young and naive because she asked him why he was taking money from fossil fuel corporations as if the two words were synonymous. On February 2nd, a group of students asked their senator to support a Green New Deal to fight climate change, but she said that she knew what she was doing and she had been, quote, doing this for a while. Senator Feinstein, if you knew what you were doing, you would have introduced a Green New Deal decades ago when this crisis became known.
Yeah!
But instead, you took over $250,000 from oil and gas companies, lining your pockets with money that condemned our generation to a dangerous future.
Yeah.
You would have listened to the youth pleading with you to listen to them and save their futures instead of shutting them down. Our politicians are no better. Orrin Hatch, Mike Lee, Gary Herbert, and Robert Bishop are all politicians that decided to put profit over people, above our communities, above our futures, and above our health by taking thousands of dollars from the same companies that threaten our livelihoods.
Boo!
We are not new to the ways that they undermine us. When they tell us to go get a degree before talking to them, or tell us to work on an easier project, I know that we're getting to something. They discourage us when we rightfully question and criticize their authority. But when we sit with our heads bowed in submission, only then are we called Utah's bright and shining futures. If you don't do your job to look out for the health of our communities, I will not sit with my head bowed down. I will not just be a good girl and go to school. I will question your authority until the end of time because I know that it scares you.
Yeah! Woo!
Our state has and continued to fail our generation and the generations to come. The State and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, also known as SITLA, is an institution that leases out lands to extractive industries, quote, for the children. We know that you're using young people as a shield to hide the destructive projects you're pursuing that will ultimately cost us our lungs, our air, our water, and our climate. We do not want your dirty money. We will not fall for it. The state is currently building an inland port next to the airport, right under our noses.
Boo!
The port will ruin the wetlands, disrupt bird migration patterns, pour dirty emissions into the air, and export fossil fuels. They also plan to go into schools and communities on the west side to recruit them for low-paying jobs instead of going to college.
Boo!
Breathing in fumes like the one that the inland port will produce will increase their chance of getting lung cancer by 40 to 50%. This port is being built under the guise of economic opportunity when it only really helps the rich get richer. We will not fall for it.
Yeah!
This youth movement didn't just start with Greta. We are building off of generations of youth resistance, which was done by our elders in this very crowd, and often the youth of color who are ignored and unrecognized for their work.
Woo!
We are all in this fight together. As a generation that has the last chance to stop the climate crisis, we are calling for climate justice, a Green New Deal, and no more fossil fuel projects.
Yeah!
Compromise is not an option. We are not young and naive. We are young and unstoppable. We have our eyes and ears on you. We will not be manipulated. The oceans are rising, and so are we.
Yeah!
Sincerely, your bright and shining future. Thank you.
Woo!
This climate strike means that young people are standing up for the earth, and that means we're standing up for our health because whatever we eat, whatever we come from is coming from the earth, and if our earth is not healthy, we will not be healthy, our communities will not be healthy. So this strike is the embodiment of the golden rule because we are caring for each other, we're caring for the communities that will be disproportionately impacted by the climate change.
Minorities, they may be scared that their voice is not important.
Some youth might not feel educated enough, but that's not true. All you have to do is ask for help.
There's a lot of issues going on and we just don't do anything about it. I just want people to give themselves a chance.
Youth Rise Texas is located on the east side of Austin. When it comes to voting for young people and minorities, we're really trying to teach them tools so that they can know the value of their voice and know the power that we have collectively. Party at the Polls is a youth-led voter mobilization event. It's happening on the east side of Austin.
I think it's super exciting. I love seeing all of my friends going out and getting more excited about things that they care about.
Yes, it's gonna be fun. We're gonna have food and games there, a celebration for people, encourage them to vote.
I hope that we get a record number of young voters coming out. I think it's especially important for people of color, and so hopefully through activities like this that makes voting a little more fun, we can achieve that goal.
I understand that a lot of people might think that our vote don't count because of where we come from, but my family and I had to do a self-deportation in Mexico when I was 3 years old, and I'm the only one in the family who can make a change and go out and vote.
Growing up, I saw the effect of the incarceration system upon generation after generation. Voting really ends that cycle because everybody has a voice. Saying who you want to be in office for future generations could say a lot.
There was no really talking about politics at home or anything. My mom didn't vote, even though she could. Parents don't talk about it, schools don't talk about it, and I think what we're trying to get is more of awareness because not everyone thinks that it's important for them to vote.
I think events like this really help promote and transform what would normally be slacktivism into actual activism and actual engagement.
I want my community to be heard. I want my people's voices to be heard out there. So I think voting is the first step.
I invited my friend over here.
Yeah, I voted.
Was it your first time?
Yeah, it was my first time.
Voting is an exciting, important thing. So come vote and have fun. Come celebrate you changing your generation.
It's so important, not only minority but also minority youth to come in and vote, because whether they realize it or not, they make such a huge impact.
We're becoming less of a minority now, and so we're going to be the ones that live with the consequences of whatever this election and the next elections come with. So I think it's important to put our opinion there because we're going to live with it anyway.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We want to welcome you to the Golden Rule Day broadcast. And it's a privilege and pleasure to be part of this creative community of passionate voices from around the world, especially with April being Earth Month, to learn about how the Golden Rule applies to planet Earth. So get ready to shift your frame from individual me to the collective we, as we discover on this interview Earth as a superorganism that utilizes cooperative self-organization to create and maintain the conditions essential to our existence as interconnected beings on this immensely beautiful planet. So I'm Thea LaGrue, founding director at Compathos and Films for the Planet. And on behalf of the Charter of Compassion, today I have the privilege of speaking to two of the most eminent thinkers, influencers, and illustrious writers of our time, David Corton and Matthew Fox. Matthew and David, it's a pleasure and an honor to be speaking with you today. Welcome to the Golden Rule Day broadcast.
It's a real pleasure to be with you and Matt.
Good pleasure for me too, to be with both of you.
So a little bit about our guests, David and Matthew. Matthew's writing has had a profound effect on me personally in my life, for which I'm deeply grateful, as well as multitudes of others. David is a best-selling author, political activist, and former professor of the Harvard Business School who writes and speaks on global and national issues. He serves as president of the Living Economics Forum, is co-founder of Yes Magazine, and a member of the Club of Rome. His international bestsellers include When Corporations Rule the World, and David's best known for his seminal books, Framing a New Economy for an Ecological Civilization, and books such as The Great Turning from Empire to Earth Community and Change the Story, Change the Future, A Living Economy for a Living Earth, to name a few of many. So Matthew is an elder, activist, spiritual theologian, and recipient of prestigious Peace and Ethics Awards, and author of 35 plus books on spirituality and culture. Among them are Original Blessing, Spirituality Named Compassion, The Reinvention of Work, The Hidden Spirituality of Men, Meister Eckhart, A Mystic Warrior for Our Times, which is my personal favorite, and more recently, Order of the Sacred Earth, an anthology with David Corton, Skylar Wilson, and Jennifer Listag, among others, which we will be referring to today. So I'd like to talk about the universal principles of the Golden Rule and the need for a spiritual awakening and a creative renaissance that moves humanity away from its kind of self-centered or anthropocentric view of ourselves to that of participants in a new ecological civilization. So, David, you so eloquently describe our place in Earth's living community as an interdependent, symbiotic relationship. So what exactly is Earth's living community, and how do we form relationships within that community to help regenerate our planet's ecosystems?
Well, nice to start out with a very simple question. In a way, it is very simple. And one of the things that is so extraordinary to me is that the deepest wisdom that I find myself sharing with people are really things that we already know. You know, one of my favorite frames is we have to kind of wake up in our current situation to the fact that we humans are living beings born of and nurtured by a living earth. Now, to most of us, that sounds pretty obvious when you mention it that way, and people look at you and say, well, what makes you so smart? I know that. The thing that makes it significant is that it's contrary to pretty much everything that we are taught and everything that that we hear in the news and hear in day-to-day conversation, where our culture has for a long time been built around empire and oppression of one another and oppression and exploitation of earth. And an economics currently that tells us that real wealth is money, and we become wealthy by making money and so forth, which turns us against Earth. It turns us into exploiting Earth and into exploiting one another. So, you know, if you look at the deeper reality of our human situation currently, it would be quite accurate to say that we're on a path to self-extinction. And it is literally by our choice of exploitation. And if we're to have a future that will work for us and for Earth, we have to come back to these basic fundamentals, recognizing that we're living beings, that Earth is a living being, and that our well-being and Earth's well-being are totally interdependent, and that we need to be living for each other rather than against each other. I think with that, I'll turn it over to you, Matt, because much of what I've learned about the nature of our spiritual teachings and the misdirections of many of those teachings and what we need to come to understand about our true nature, I've really learned from you.
Well, the learning is mutual, I assure you, David. Back when I wrote my book on evil several years ago, your book on capitalism played a big part in it. A lot of concrete examples of what you're talking about. But yes, religion is part of the problem too. You talked about exploitation and so forth. Think of the horrible things that happened in the 16th century when Europeans sailed away from Europe, and what they did to the Africans, which eventually ended, of course, in the slave trade, what they did to indigenous cultures in the Americas and in the Pacific Islands and Asia. I mean, you know, there's plenty of folly to go around here. And the whole idea that you get in a lot of religion still about individual salvation, that we're here to go to some place called heaven, no matter whom we step on to get there. The idea of private salvation is really contrary to the biblical consciousness. Christopher Stendhal, a great biblical theologian, says the question, am I saved, is an erotic question. It's not anywhere in the Bible. So a lot of Christianity has built itself on that one erotic question. And it is, as Thea pointed out at the beginning, are moving away from this egocentricity, the I, and not just the I of the individual, but the I of our species, the anthropocentrism, and what Pope Francis has rightly called our narcissism as a species. Our religion has to get beyond that and back to its deeper teachings. And of course, in the Golden Rule, do unto others as you want done to yourself, or in Jesus saying, love your neighbor as yourself, or in the Hebrew Bible, am I my brother's keeper? The question is the same. Who is my brother? Who is my neighbor? And who are these others? And what we see in the context that you're helping to set out there, David, is that in a cosmic context, in the context of the earth itself, the air is my brother. The waters are my brother. The earth is my mother, the growing sisters all over the place in terms of trees and other animals and so forth. So what we have to do is get back to this pre-modern awareness that indigenous people still hold, but that our medieval ancestors knew well, that all of nature is a revelation of the divine, and all of nature is sacred, and therefore it all has its rights and its appropriate reverence between us. And so another way to put this language about relating to the living earth is how Hildegard, 12th century, she says that we belong to a web of creation, a web. We are in a relationship like a web with all these other realities, the earth, the air, the fire, the water, and all these other creatures. And she says, if we, you know, a web, of course, is flexible. But if humans, she says, commit injustice toward these other web creatures, she says, God will allow creation to punish humanity. And that's what's happening today with climate change is so much that we have been so set on our own agenda, as you said, David, exploiting the earth, that the earth is now coming back at us. And so it is a wake-up time, as you say, and that's what spirituality, I think, is about. It is about waking up, and the time is running short for our species. I'll just end with this one quote I heard from a very renowned biologist a few years ago at Stanford. He said, "We're the first species in 4.5 billion that can choose not to go extinct." Then he added, "But of course, we haven't made that choice yet." Well, time is running out, and I think this is what this discussion is all about. How do we make the right choices and swiftly to save not just the planet as we know it, but certainly our species. As you say, we are headed for extinction on the current path.
Matt, I want to sort of bring you back to your own frame. Because I think part of what is so foundational to this, I've become very, very aware of the extent to which our stories shape us, our deepest stories, beliefs about creation. And of course, we pretty much all raised on this story of the distant patriarch God, that somehow the ground of being and the force and the agency of creation is kind of an old white guy with a beard. And I always kind of wonder where that came from, but that is very different from your frame of creation spirituality, which to me absolutely aligns with our current story from science of how creation came about, that it, put in spiritual terms, that it actually began with a great spirit, but a spirit that materially was a kind of nothingness, and that creation is about the bursting forth of that spirit seeking to know itself and its possibilities. And that creates a wholly different frame. So instead of focusing on what does this old guy want us to do so we can get a good place in the afterlife, as you were speaking, rather, what is the purpose and thrust of this unfolding of this creative spirit, this creative energy, that in fact, from the beginning of time, has been self-organizing into a universe that is ever more complex, ever more beautiful, ever more aware, and has ever greater possibility for continued unfolding. And that to me is so foundational to thinking about ourselves now and what our purpose is and our relationship to Earth. And I'm just so excited by and pleased by your framing of the order of the sacred earth, to recognize our responsibility to Earth and the creative possibilities that we're not apart from Earth, but we are engaged in a journey with Earth, an exploration, an unfolding.
Exactly. I mean, that's what evolution is, isn't it? It's the unfolding, and it's a process that's been going on from the first millisecond of the smaller than a zygote being that burst into what we call the fireball, and the beginning of the universe. One of my basic concepts is that of original blessing, and blessing means goodness. So it's about original goodness, that this universe, if we look back, here we are 13.8 billion years after its origin. What a marvelous, as you say, and gradually complex and becoming more and more conscious and more aware universe we live in. And we humans do have an amazing place in it, as tiny as we are, and as recent as we are, and as tiny as the Earth is, in perspective of all 2 trillion galaxies. Nevertheless, we have this intelligence and creativity and curiosity. to ask and answer some questions about our origin, where we come from. But you have to say it's been a good thing all along, even though there's been tremendous upheaval and tremendous moments of dying, and what I would call living, dying, and resurrecting that happens with supernovas and galaxies and planets and all. But looking back, we say, well, all of this has birthed us, and not just us, but all these amazing beings we share the planet with, the rainforests and the whales and the elephants and all the wonderful beings. But so it really is a blessing. By that, I would mean that we've inherited goodness. And when you ask about what's the purpose of the universe, I go back to what Thomas Aquinas said in the 13th century, a pre-modern thinker, but an amazing thinker. He said that sheer joy is God's, and this demands companionship. So for him, the purpose of the universe is joy. It's about spreading joy. And Thomas Berry, whom you know well, and who was a great eco-prophet of our time, now deceased, he says you can summarize the entire universe in one word. That word is celebration. He says it's all a celebration of the fecundity and the beauty of being. And here we are, as you say, we're invited on board to contribute to the celebration and to praise. I love how mystic poet Mary Oliver talks about being a praise poet, that we're here to praise, which is to say thank you for the gifts, the blessings, the great deal of goodness that we experience, and of course to pass it on to the future generations, healthy and alive and full of the beauty that we inherited as an original blessing. So I see that as kind of a framework for recognizing the sacredness of the earth. It's bigger than us, and therefore it inspires awe and wonder, but also, as you say, responsibility. And how are we responding in kind? How are we giving thanks? How are we praising the earth for its accomplishments and for its generosity in rendering us a place in the story? And yeah, so all these concepts that you're developing and alluding to, they all, I think, help us to build up, as you say, a new story, a different way of seeing the presence, the omnipresence of the sacred. God not as a old white man with a beard, but as a presence intrinsic to the joy and the development, the wisdom of the universe, who speaks to our hearts as well as our heads. And I think that's what all religions have in common, is that they want to teach us to give thanks. Like Rabbi Heschel says, praise precedes faith. So I think as a species, the modern era kind of whittled down the notion of praise. It was all, as you said, about exploiting and getting. But if we pause and step back, like we can do now with this new creation story from science, praise comes right to the fore, because none of us made this, we're just uncovering it. And it's glorious that we have the minds and the eyes and the creativity to do this uncovering, to come to the realization of what an amazing story it is that has brought us this far. And as you say, we are part of the story. We are co-creators to give a happy ending to this journey of our species and the earth itself. We now have taken on the burden of the survival of many other species. And so, like never before, our choices, our moral choices, carry tremendous weight, because it's not just about our species that's going extinct, as we know. This is the greatest spasm of extinction of other species the planet has seen in 65 million years. So, and we humans are kind of holding the reins on this. We have to wake up to this new story.
You know, one of the great breakthroughs for me in terms of my understanding was coming to recognize the deep, profound interdependence of life. Now, you mentioned earlier, the science now identifies or estimates there are maybe as many as 2 trillion galaxies in the cosmos. That's quite a few galaxies because each one has billions of stars and how many planets. But this is still the only planet that we've identified that we have reason to believe has conditions on its surface suitable to maintaining complex organic life forms. Which brings us into the question of what is it that makes this particular planet different? And here again is where science is giving us these extraordinary new insights that the reason this planet is different is because of the early microorganisms. And
David, I think you muted yourself.
oh, my cursor was over the mute, and I think I just
cursed
that. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, what science now tells us is that the reason our planet is distinctive is because of the microorganisms that related to Earth's geological systems to create the conditions of the atmosphere and the water and the fertility of the soils and so forth that were essential for more complex forms of organic life to emerge. We're just beginning to understand this. But the reason it is so terribly important to our present situation is recognizing that in its natural dead state, our planet is totally uninhabitable by humans, which is why we talk about being on a path to self-extinction, because part of this process of preparation, this extraordinary process of creation, had to do with capturing from the surface of this earth excess carbons and all kinds of toxic materials and sequestering them deep, deep underground so that the surface of the planet would be livable and the various species working together would create and maintain the conditions of climate and soil and waters and so forth that give this planet its life and its beauty. And so here we humans, totally misunderstanding our own nature, misunderstanding our responsibility to Earth, our primary work is digging up these carbons and these toxins and throwing them back out into the atmosphere because we find somehow in the process of that we can make money, which in fact is nothing but numbers on a computer hard drive. And we think we're so smart and we are getting so rich and we are, we are systematically and almost intentionally destroying Earth's capacity to support life and to support us, which is why it is so absolutely foundational that we come to recognize our true nature as living beings, that we engage in this, that we understand creation spirituality, that we align with the order of the sacred earth, that Earth is sacred, life is sacred. This is the foundation of our place in creation. And it involves a huge responsibility. It's not just being compassionate to Earth, it is recognizing that we are totally interdependent. And we must recognize, acknowledge, and exercise our fundamental responsibility both to one another and to Earth. And of course, the responsibility to one another recognizes it also by our very nature as human beings. We cannot exist as individuals. I mean, we think of the plight of a single mother living on her own on the plains. There's no way that any human being can maintain themselves, maintain their children totally alone. And this is part again of the deeper principle that we're beginning to learn. I mean, this is very new to science. It was inherent in the knowledge of indigenous people. But life can exist only in communities that self-organize to create and maintain the conditions of their own existence. And that is the deep thing that we now need to learn. And it's why this this Order of the Sacred Earth and our commitment to learning about our nature and our responsibilities and dedicating ourselves to exercising that responsibility is so foundational to everything that we face right now as a species.
Mm-hmm. Well, you are so articulate about what really matters, and you're really hitting it on the head. I will say this one thing, of course, that compassion means, Thomas Merton said that in his last talk he gave just 3 hours before he died, 1968, the Catholic monk. He said that compassion is a keen awareness of the interdependence of all living things that are all part of one another and belong to one another. So the very definition of compassion is about interdependence. And from that point of view, I think that many of our spiritual traditions, well, really all of them, have been trying to teach this behavior of interdependence when they've been truest to themselves. And they've often wandered off and joined up with the very forces of empire and power over, rather than power with, that have created, and of course anthropocentrism is part of that have created such havoc in our world. But the real meaning of compassion is that it's a synonym for interdependence. And so, and you have this, like in the medieval mystics, both Hildegard of Bingen and Meister Eckhart talk about interdependence, that everything is interdependent. And they derive their morality of compassion out of that. So it's not as if the moral imperative is something we're just discovering in 2019. Our ancestors did have an awareness, not certainly the cosmic awareness that we have today of 2 trillion galaxies. And by the way, I've been told by 2 scientists now, they've agreed with each other, that if you count all the billions of stars in 2 trillion galaxies, there are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on all the beaches on the earth. That's how many stars. It's like a really big thing. The sun, our sun, holds 1 million Earths. That's how big the star is that we call a sun. 1 million Earths. We don't feel these proportions very often, but that's so important. I want to pick up, of course, on your and Thea's reference to the Order of the Sacred Earth, because this movement today is about people of all spiritual traditions or none, taking a vow together, one vow. I promise to be the best lover of Earth, and the best defender of Earth that I can be. That's the sacred vow. And I think it's timely, very timely, because a lot of people are abandoning organized institutional religion as we know it. But that doesn't mean they just want to charge into a desecularized existence. They want community, and they want to be part of a spiritual practice, which has as its goal the awareness of thanks and gratitude for the sacred earth. And so this movement is really beginning to catch fire, and I think for the very reasons that you articulate, David, that we have to do this as a community. We have to do this not alone. There's no lone rangers in saving and healing the planet. There's so many dimensions to the peril that Earth faces, but one of them is, of course, a spiritual awakening, because there is where you get motivation, you get the energy flowing, you get generosity flowing, and passion for eco-justice, and the creativity that alone is going to pull us out of this dive that we're in. And of course, the tremendous contribution of science itself to tell us, like you are telling us, what's at the basis of our survival and our uniqueness as a planet of a living planet of so many wonderful living creatures, all so interdependent with each other. And to think, like you were describing, that we humans owe everything to tiny, tiny microorganisms. You know, where are they in our public prayers of thanks and gratitude? And so it's an amazing journey we're on here, that science has so much to teach us. On the other hand, our spiritual yearnings and our spiritual traditions also have to step up, because they too have a lot more to teach us than we've been told. Once we get off this treadmill of am I saved or not, the question is, are we together preserving and respecting and celebrating the sacredness of this unique planet, this, and therefore sacred place we call Earth?
Yeah, Matt, I want to see if you share this perception with me. I have a very strong sense that something very deep shifted in the global consciousness about last mid-November. It's a pretty precise date, but it is, you know, in a way a lot of us have known for a long time that we're on a path towards self-extinction, but it's very hard to get that conversation going. There's a very natural tendency to deny it because, you know, what can I do? I mean, all I can do is hope that it's not true. But somehow it seems like something very recently and very deep shifted with a kind of massive spread of recognition that, yes, we are in deep danger. And it's going to require some very, very major changes that require deep rethinking, deep shared rethinking, and deep shared action. And it's going to mean that everything in our lives needs to change, and we'd better get on with it very quickly. I know, do you have any? I've talked to a number of people that say, yeah, I kind of sense it was about that same time. You know, part of it is the coming forward of women in a much stronger and more assertive way to bring the feminine into the conversation, which is something that you talk about a lot. So how do you see that?
No question about it, that the work of women and the passion of women is playing a very positive role in all this. And of course, the New Green Deal movement is raising consciousness about the question, and of course about possible answers. But I don't look so much to mid-November, although I think that is related to the election, actually, that particular date. Because I mean, I see this movement, you know, having been decades old, is just beginning to flourish perhaps now, because we're getting, remember, it was the United Nations report last year that told us we have 12 years left. I think that really kind of woke some people up, a lot of people up. And it is this denial thing that you allude to that is really playing havoc still. To think that we live in a country where one entire political party is officially in denial about climate change, it's really amazing, because science has spoken, and the United Nations has spoken. I mean, not just spoken, but everyone is screaming about this outside of our.
Nature has also spoken and tells us every day.
That's right. That's right. With all the droughts and the floods and all the rest, and it's going to get worse, not better. So, yeah, I think that climate change itself is speaking finally to a lot of people. But I do agree that I think that the whole menu that you laid out about extractive capitalism and so forth is very much a patriarchal problem, because patriarchy is a philosophy of control, and that's very different from living interdependently. Interdependence requires a balance, And so the undoing patriarchy, and feminism is a deep part of that, but so too is cleaning up what we mean by the masculine, undoing the toxic masculine, which is based on control, but rediscovering the deeper masculine, the sacred masculine, which is about relationship to the sky and to history and to all other beings. It's about, and the green man and all these archetypes we have in our ancestry that require that men step up to be warriors, not fighting wars against each other or in the name of nationhood or exploitation of resources, but rather get that same energy going to stand up to climate change and to all the destruction that's happening in our midst, and to link up with the feminine principle of compassion and justice. All that is on the horizon. So I love the definition of hope from David Orr, the eco-philosopher, when he says hope is a verb with the sleeves rolled up. That is where I get my hope, that there are these movements happening now, and many, of course, from the young. And that's where the New Green movement is coming from, the New Green Deal, that the young are, of course, carrying the weight on this. I know many young couples, for example, today who are asking, do we dare bring children into the world today because of the crisis we are facing? I mean, that's a really heavy but very personal, ethical decision to make or not to make. So the young especially are carrying the burden here. And this is where I think something like the Order of the Sacred Earth is so valuable, because you have elders and young together linking up. Whatever movements we create to do this, it has to be intergenerational today. We need the wisdom of the young as well as the wisdom of the elders. And there is fire. And then there's not just, it's not about, are we all going to collapse out of hopelessness, or we all go into our corner to do our thing until the world ends. It is about acting and doing what you can do, doing it together, and the rest will take care of itself one way or the other.
So I really, in your book, Matthew, Order of the Sacred Earth, you refer to a community or a movement of people in varied belief systems who kind of take a vow or a promise, make a sacred promise to be the best lover or defender of Earth that I can be. And so those are definitely not only personal vows, but vows that can be made together and in a community. So you talk about a vow or a pledge being a sacred promise, that it allows us to be mindfully focused, and it also defines our choices based on a noble purpose. And that pledge kind of serves as a rudder or a compass when things start becoming very distracting, or when things might seem impossible. You kind of go back to these vows and inner promises, that one makes. So today, we find ourselves contemplating a number of pledges and proclamations, all of which serve a common and planetary good, and all of which demonstrates the universal principles vital for maintaining our personal and planetary health. So we have the Golden Rule Pledge, which is being talked about during this broadcast, the Charter of Compassion, and the Order of the Sacred Earth, all which are very well worth our consideration. So using these overarching principles, we just want to really invite everyone listening to this broadcast to learn and make learning and unlearning, for that matter, kind of a sacred practice, and meditate on how you and your community can make a unique contribution to the future of our species and our planet. And, as David was saying, it's kind of a time to really think about the implications not only on a planetary level but on a universal level, which is what Matthew's talking about. What is our universal kind of, what's the cosmic adventure? What is our community, our Earth community, and all the interconnected living species on this planet? What's calling out to us in this time and place? And so I think there's a lot of value in this particular broadcast to really help us gather our thoughts and our energy, and especially thank you for referring to it as a celebration. I think that's so beautiful because we need hope right now, and we need just a new message of hope. I think something that you referred to was that, you know, when we're pessimistic, it kind of interferes with our creativity, and we need a lot of creativity right now. And I know personally I struggle with that a lot, you know, just feeling overwhelmed and kind of pessimistic at times. And so the invitation to, you know, to be invited by Earth's living community into a celebration of creation, that's what I think you refer to as spiritual, you know, community and spiritual just creation. And so I would like to just you know, invite everyone to think about this, and if you would like more information, please explore this further. Golden Rule Project, the Charter of Compassion, sign the charter, sign these proclamations, but don't stop there, just keep going. And also, if you want more information, go to davidcorton.com and matthewfox.com, and also recommend org on those. And orderofthesacredearth.org also. And also we are going to be sharing excerpts of this conversation with a film documentary called Living in the Future's Past, a new documentary produced and narrated by Academy Award winning Jeff Bridges during our Earth Month streaming film series called Metamorphic Convergence, so which you can find at filmsfortheplanet.com. So the charter notified us about 5 minutes ago that our time is run out, and so I'm just wanting to wrap this up and thank everybody for listening to this and participating. And thank you, Matthew and David. And I had a bunch of questions and you guys answered them all. So thank you so much. It was great. It was really a beautiful conversation. Love it so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you didn't feel left out. I'm glad our conversation covered your questions.
We covered everything. Thank you.